He came on foot, alone, in a soldier's red coat gone dark with road dust, and he asked me the way to the grave at the edge of the map. I was splitting wood behind my house when his shadow fell across the block. We do not get strangers in Saltreach. The post road dies 40 miles east of us at the Brennel Ford, and after that there is only the old soldier's track, which goes nowhere a sane man wants to go, up through the gorse and the broken country to the far ridge they used to call the world's last fence. So when I looked up and saw a man in the king's own colors standing in my yard, his bearskin cased and slung, his boots white with the dust of 100 miles, I set down my axe and I stared like a fool. "Forgive me," he said. His voice was low, courteous, worn thin with thirst. "I'm told there's a cairn above the old line, a war grave. I've come a long way to find it. I am a settler. My name is Harl Venn, and I keep 40 sheep and a poor garden on the last farmed land before the high ground, and I have lived at the edge of the realm for 31 years. In all that time, no one had ever come asking after the cairn. Not one soul. The realm forgot it. The realm forgot us." And now here stood a guardsman of the capital, 600 miles from the gilded gates he was made to stand at, asking me the way to a heap of stones that the maps no longer bothered to mark. I did not know it yet, but that question would change my corner of the world for good. "There's a grave up there, true enough," I said carefully. "But it's 3 days' walk and the track's half gone, and there's nothing to see when you reach it but stones and weather. Begging your pardon, why would a king's man want it?" He looked at me a long moment. He had a still face, the kind that gives nothing away, and gray eyes that had clearly not slept under a roof in some while. But when he answered, something moved behind them. "Because no one else has come," he said, "and someone owes them a visit." I gave him water from my well and bread and the cold mutton I'd meant for my own supper, and he took all of it with a quiet thanks and ate slowly, the way a disciplined man eats, making it last. While he ate, I looked him over. He was perhaps 50, lean and upright, with a soldier's economy in every movement, no waste, no fidget. His red coat had been brushed and brushed again until the brushing could do nothing more against the dust of the road. The brass buttons were polished. The white gloves were folded with care in his belt, kept clean for something. A man does not carry clean white gloves 600 miles across broken country unless he means to use them for a purpose. "You walked," I said, "from the capital." "From the Brennel Ford. I took the coach as far as it runs." He paused. "And before that, yes, I walked the parts a coach won't go." "That's no small journey for stones." "No," he agreed, "it isn't." He would not say more, not then. He asked only if he might sleep in my barn and start up the track at first light, and I, who had not had a guest to feed in 2 years and was lonelier than I liked to admit, told him no. He would sleep in my house and eat at my table, and I would guide him up the old line myself, because the track was treacherous and a man alone could break a leg in the scree and lie there till the crows found him. He tried to refuse. He did not want to be a burden. I told him the truth, that I had not been up to the high ground since I was a young man, and that I had always been ashamed of that, and that if he was fool enough to walk 600 miles to honor the dead, the least a settler could do was carry his pack. That settled it. We left at dawn. The first day's climb is the cruel one. The track leaves my fields and goes up through a country of gorse and gray rock, and the wind never stops, and the path the soldiers cut a lifetime ago has been chewed away by frost and rain until it is more memory than road. I knew the way only because my grandfather had taken me once, when I was a boy, and had told me there was something up there worth the climb. He died before he could tell me what. The guardsman climbed without complaint. He set a steady, unhurried pace, the pace of a man who has learned that the way to cover great distances is never to hurry and never to stop, and he carried himself up that brutal slope as though he were on parade. When the wind tried to stagger him, he leaned into it and went on. When the scree slid under his boots, he found his feet again without a sound. I, who knew the ground, slipped and swore and sweated. He did not slip, and he did not swear, and the only sound he made was breathing. We talked a little, climbing. I told him about Saltreach, the dozen families who hang on out here, the long winters, the way the realm's taxmen remember us every spring, and the realm's everything else forgets us all the rest of the year. He listened. He was a good listener, the kind who makes you say more than you meant to. I found myself telling him things I had not told anyone. How my wife had wanted to leave for the lowlands before she died. How my son had gone to the capital and not come back. How a man can love a hard country and still feel that the country has been abandoned by everyone who matters. You feel forgotten, he said. It was not a question. We are forgotten, I said. Look at us. The last fence, the edge of the map. Past here there's nothing the realm wants, so the realm pretends there's nothing here at all. He was quiet for a while. The track had brought us to a shoulder of the ridge, and below us the whole broken country fell away east toward the border, league after league of gorse and gray stone, beautiful and empty and unloved. They thought that too, he said at last. The men in the grave, they held this edge so the rest of the realm could forget it existed. That was the whole of their work, to stand where no one would ever come so that the comfortable middle of the kingdom could sleep without knowing their names. They did it well. They did it to the end. And then the realm did exactly what they'd bought it the right to do. He looked out at the emptiness. It forgot. I did not know yet what he meant, but I felt the weight of it settle on me, the way the cold settles when the sun goes behind the ridge. That night we sheltered under an overhang where the soldiers must once have sheltered too, for there were the black scars of old fires on the rock, and when I looked, a name scratched into the stone with a knife, the letters worn almost to nothing. The guardsman ran one finger over it. He did not say anything, but he took off his glove to touch it, bare skin to the old stone, and he stayed like that a long time while I built the fire. I learned his name on the second day. It was Aldous Crane, and he was a sergeant of the King's Guard, and he had stood his post at the Capitol gates for 26 years, 26 years of standing immaculate and motionless, while the realm photographed him and laughed at him, and tried to make him blink. I asked him, on the second day, what had finally sent him up the world's last fence after a heap of forgotten stones, and that was when he told me the thing that broke my heart and remade it. There was an old man, he said. He used to come to the gates. Every year on the same day, the autumn the leaves turned. He'd stand across the road from my post for an hour just looking. Old soldier, you could tell by how he held himself, even bent the way he was. The first few years I thought he came to see the changing of the guard like the tourists, but he never watched the ceremony. He watched me, one man standing still, as if the still man was the only part of it that mattered to him. We were climbing as he spoke. The second day's country is higher and colder, the gorse giving way to bare rock and lichen, and a wind that has crossed 300 miles of emptiness to reach you. The fifth year he crossed the road. The relief had just marched off and I was alone at the post for a moment, and he came up close, closer than the rope allows, and the new men would have moved him along, but I didn't. I don't know why, something in his face. He looked up at me. He was a small man by then. The years had folded him down, and he said, "You stand like they stood." That was all. You stand like they stood. And then he told me about the line. The line, I said. The far line, this line. Crane gestured at the ridge above us, climbing pale into the clouds. 60 years ago, when he was young, there was a war on the eastern border, a small war, the kind the histories give half a page. The realm sent a company up to hold the high ground above the old line, the last defensible ground before the border, so that the enemy couldn't come down through the gorge into the settled country. 120 men. They were told to hold until they were relieved. He stopped walking. The relief never came. There was a treaty, and the war ended, and somewhere in the capital a clerk drew a new line on a new map, and the high ground stopped mattering to anyone who drew maps. And the order to bring those men home was never given, because the men who would have given it had already moved on to the next thing, and the men still up here weren't on anyone's list anymore. I felt cold that had nothing to do with the wind. How long, I asked, how long did they hold? Through the winter, Crane said. The whole of it. They didn't know the war was over. No one came to tell them. They held the line against an enemy that had already gone home, in the worst winter in living memory, because they had been told to hold and no one had told them to stop. Most of them died of the cold and the hunger, up here, doing their duty for a realm that had already forgotten they existed. The last few buried the rest under a cairn, this cairn, the one we're climbing to, and then they tried to walk out. The old man at the gates was the only one who made it down alive. He was 18. He carried the company's roll in his coat the whole way, the names of every man so that someone would know. He spent 60 years trying to get the realm to remember them. He wrote letters. He went to offices. He was told the records were lost, or the matter was closed, or there was no budget, or it was all a very long time ago. And then he got old, and no one would even take his letters. So once a year he came and stood across the road from the only thing left in the whole kingdom that still stood the way his friends had stood, a king's guard at his post. And he looked at it, because it was the closest he could come to honoring them. The wind keened over the ridge. I did not trust myself to speak. He died this spring, Crane said. I found out because he didn't come the day the leaves turned. I made inquiries. He died alone in a charity ward, and he'd left one thing, the company roll, 60 years old, in a tin. He left it to the guardsman at the east post, because he didn't know my name. He only knew that I stood the way they stood. Crane touched his chest, where, I understood now, the tin must have ridden the whole 600 miles. 120 names, not one of them ever honored, not one grave the realm will admit exists. And an old man spent his whole life carrying them, and then he died, and there was no one left to carry them but me. He looked at me, and his still face was not still anymore. So I asked for leave, and I came. I have lived a hard, plain life, and I am not a man who weeps easily. But I turned my face into the wind so that Sergeant Crane would not see what was on it, and I picked up his pack which I had set down, and I said, "Then we'd best keep climbing." We climbed the rest of that second day in a different kind of silence, not the awkward silence of strangers, but the silence of two men carrying the same weight. I kept thinking of the old man across the road from the gate, year after year, looking at one still soldier because it was all the honoring the world would let him do. I kept thinking of 120 men in the worst winter in living memory, holding a line against an enemy that had already gone home, certain. They must have been certain that the relief was just over the next ridge, that the realm had not forgotten them, that someone was coming. No one was coming. And the cruelest part, the part that lodged in me like a thorn, was that they had done it perfectly. They had not broken. They had held to the last man, and then buried each other with what strength they had left and tried to walk down to tell someone. And the realm had answered their perfect, terrible discipline with 60 years of silence. I asked Crane, as we made camp in the lee of a great split boulder, whether it angered him, the realm's forgetting, the clerks and their lost records and their closed matters. He thought about it honestly. He was a man who did not say a thing until he meant it. It did, he said. When the old man first told me, I was angry for a year. I'd stand my post and look at the crowds, the tourists laughing, the officials hurrying past, the whole comfortable middle of the kingdom that those men died to keep comfortable, and I'd think, you owe them and you don't even know their names. He turned a strip of dried meat in his fingers. But anger's a poor traveling companion. It runs out. What it left behind when it ran out was something steadier, not anger that the realm forgot. Just the plain fact that someone has to remember and the remembering doesn't do itself, and I was the one who'd been handed the tin. He looked at the fire. Honor isn't a feeling, Harl. I learned that standing the gates. Honor is a thing you do with your body, whether you feel it or not, because it's owed. Those men did their duty when no one was watching, and no one would ever know. The least I can do is do mine the same way. I have turned those words over 1,000 times since, on the long nights when the wind comes down off the ridge and I cannot sleep. Honor is a thing you do with your body because it's owed. I had spent 31 years at the edge of the realm feeling forgotten, feeling owed, waiting for the comfortable middle of the kingdom to remember me and mine. And here was a man who had walked 600 miles to pay a debt that was not even his, to men he had never met, who could never thank him, in a place no one would ever see him do it. He was not waiting to be remembered. He had simply decided to be the one who remembers. The third day nearly killed us both. The weather turned in the night, as the weather does up there, with a viciousness the lowlands cannot imagine. We woke to a wind that flattened the lichen and a sky the color of cold iron, and within an hour of climbing, the rain came, not lowland rain but the driving, freezing, sideways rain of the high country, that finds every gap in your clothes and fills your boots and turns the rock to grease. I have been on that ridge in foul weather before and turned back. I told Crane we should turn back. Waited out a day under the split boulder. The cairn was not going anywhere. It had waited 60 years. He looked at me through the rain, his red coat black with water, his cased bearskin a sodden weight on his shoulders, and he said, with no drama at all, "It's waited 60 years for someone to come. I won't make it wait an hour longer because I was wet." So we went on. I will not pretend it was not terrible. The last ascent to the high line is a scramble up a long tongue of broken scree, and in the wet it shifted and slid under us, and twice I went down hard, and once Crane caught the back of my coat and held me one-handed on that grease-slick slope with a strength I did not expect from a lean man of 50 until I found my feet again. He never once suggested we stop. He never once complained. He climbed that murderous slope in the freezing rain with the same composure I imagine he had stood the gates with, 26 years of standing immaculate while the world tried to make him break, and I understood, watching him, that the stillness I had taken for coldness was the opposite of coldness. It was a furnace held under perfect control. The discipline was not the absence of feeling. The discipline was how he carried feeling too heavy for most men to lift. We came over the top of the scree at the worst of the storm, soaked through and shaking with cold, and the wind hit us full as we cleared the lip of the ridge. And there on the bare crown of the world, where the realm ends and the empty country begins, in the gray screaming rain, was the cairn. It was not much to look at. I want to be honest, because honesty is the only fit tribute to what happened there. It was a long, low mound of gathered stones, perhaps the length of 2 men lying head to foot, and the height of a kneeling man, and the years had pulled it half down. The frost of 60 winters had heaved the stones apart. Sheep had walked over it. The wind had drifted grit into its hollows. At one end someone, one of the last few, the ones who buried the others before they tried to walk down, had set up a flat slab as a kind of headstone, and on it they had scratched something, but 60 years of weather had worn it to a ghost, and I could not read it from where I stood. 120 men under those stones, the whole of a company. And it looked in the rain like a heap of rubble a careless traveler might walk past without a second glance. I stood there at the edge of it, soaked and shivering and undone, and I thought, this is what forgetting looks like. Not a grand cruelty, not a villain, just stones slowly going back to the mountain, and weather doing what weather does, and no one for 60 years, no one climbing the world's last fence to say that it mattered. Then Sergeant Crane walked past me to the foot of the grave, and he showed me what honor looks like, and I have never been the same man since. He did not rush, that was the first thing. After 3 days of brutal road and a climb that had nearly broken us both, with the rain still driving and the cold going into our bones, a lesser man, I certainly would have hurried it, said a quick word, got it done, got down to shelter. Crane did not hurry by so much as a breath. He stopped at the foot of the cairn. He set down his pack with care. And then, in that freezing rain, on that bare crown of the world, he began to do the thing he had walked 600 miles to do, and he did it exactly as though the whole realm were watching. though there was no one on that ridge but one wet settler and the wind and the dead. First he uncased the bearskin. I did not understand at first why. We were both half dead with cold. The soaked cap would be a misery on his head. But he lifted it out of its case, and he shook the rain from it, and he set it on his head and squared it, and he buttoned the chin strap, and he drew the soaked red coat straight on his shoulders and set the buttons in a line, and he took the white gloves from his belt, the white gloves he had carried clean across 600 miles of dust and rain, kept dry in an oiled wrap when everything else on him was soaked, and he drew them on. And I understood. He was not dressing for the weather. He was dressing for them. He was putting on the full uniform of the King's Guard, the immaculate ceremonial honor the realm reserves for its proudest occasions, so that the forgotten dead of the far line would receive, at long last, exactly the honor the realm gives its kings. He came to attention. I have seen soldiers stand to attention. I had a brother in the army before the border took him, but I had never seen anything like the way Aldous Crane came to attention at the foot of that grave. It was not stiffness. It was a gathering, every part of him drawn up and made straight and offered, the heels together, the spine a line, the gloved hands at the seams, the chin level, the gray eyes forward, and on his soaked red coat the rain ran down the brass buttons like the buttons were weeping. He stood there in the screaming wind, perfectly immaculate, perfectly still, a king's guard at full ceremonial honor on the bare crown of the world, and he held it. And then he saluted. The gloved hand came up slow and exact, the way it must have come up 10,000 times at the Capitol gates, and he held the salute, not the quick flick a man gives in passing, but the long, full salute a soldier gives to the fallen, held and held while the rain ran off the brim of the bearskin, and the wind tried to tear the cap from his head. He held it until my own arm ached in sympathy. And in the holding of it I saw, for the first time in my life, what the realm's tourists never see when they laugh at the still men at the gate, that the stillness is not nothing. The stillness is everything. The stillness is a man pouring out everything he has and refusing to let his body spill a drop of it. 120 men had held a line in the worst winter in living memory, certain that someone was coming, and no one came. And now, 60 years too late, someone had come, and he was holding his salute the way they had held their line, to the last of his strength, because it was owed. When at last he brought the salute down, he did not relax. He reached into his coat, and there it was, the tin, the 60-year-old tin the old man had carried down the mountain at 18, and carried for 60 years after and left at last to the guardsman at the east post. Crane opened it with cold stiff fingers, careful as a man handling something holy, and drew out the company roll, a folded sheet gone soft and brown as autumn leaf, the ink faded but, by some mercy, still legible where it had been kept folded and dry. And he read the names. He read them into the wind, one by one, all 120, in a clear, steady, unhurried voice. The voice of a man calling a roll, the voice the company's own sergeant must have used at the morning muster on this very ground 60 winters gone. He read the rank and he read the name, and after each one he paused, exactly the length of a man's here, as though waiting for an answer, as though giving each one of them the chance to answer a roll that had not been called in 60 years. The wind took the names and carried them out over the empty country, league after league of the gorse and the gray stone they had died to hold, and I stood at the foot of the grave with the rain on my face, and I wept without shame, because I understood that I was hearing something no living ear had heard since the war ended. The names of the men of the far line, spoken aloud, by a soldier, in honor, on the ground where they fell. It took a long time to read 120 names. He did not shorten it. He did not skip a man because the rain was bad or the cold was worse. Every name got its full pause, its full hear of silence, its full measure of honor. When he reached the last name, and I could tell it was the last by the way his voice gentled, he folded the roll again with the same care, and returned it to the tin, and returned the tin to his coat over his heart, where it had ridden the whole way. Then he knelt, The full uniform of the king's guard, soaked and immaculate, going down on one knee in the wet grit at the head of the grave, before the worn slab with its ghost of an inscription. And he took off one white glove, and he laid his bare hand flat on the old stone, the same gesture I had seen him make on the second night, on the knife-scratched name under the overhang, bare skin to the cold rock, the living to the dead. He stayed like that a long while, his head bowed, the rain washing over both of them, the man and the stone, and I did not hear what he said if he said anything, and I did not try to. Some things are between a soldier and the soldiers he has come to honor, and a settler keeps his distance and keeps his peace. When he rose, the worst of the storm had begun to pass. It does that up on the ridge. The weather that comes in like the end of the world blows itself out and moves on, and the iron sky cracks, and a long bar of cold gold light comes through low from the west and lies along the broken country. It came through then, as Crane got to his feet at the head of the grave, and it lay across the cairn and across his soaked red coat and across both our faces, and for one moment the bare crown of the world was lit like the inside of a cathedral. They held the line, Crane said quietly, looking out at the country in the gold light. 60 years, nobody to say it, so I'll say it. They held the line. He turned to me and the still face was wet, and not only with rain. Thank you for carrying my pack, Harl. I couldn't have made it alone. You'd have made it, I said. You'd have made it if you had to crawl. He almost smiled. Maybe, but I'm glad I didn't have to. We could not stay long on the ridge, no man can, with the night coming and the cold deepening, but before we left, Crane did one more thing. He gathered stones. He went out across the bare crown of the world in the fading gold light, and he picked up fallen stones from where the frost had heaved them, and he carried them back to the cairn, and he set them carefully back into place, rebuilding the heaved-down end of the grave. I understood what he was doing, and I went to help him, and the two of us, soaked and cold and aching, rebuilt the cairn of the far line until it stood again the height of a kneeling man, the way the last few must have built it 60 winters gone. We could not make it grand, but we could make it whole. And then we came down off the world's last fence in the dark, and it took us 2 more days, and I will not tell all of it, except to say that somewhere on the descent the thing that had been done up on the ridge began, quietly, to do its work on me. And I did not yet know it was about to do its work on all of Saltreach, and then on a good deal more of the realm besides. Here is the thing about a small, hard, forgotten place at the edge of the map. Nothing is private. By the time Crane and I came down off the high ground and limped back into Saltreach, every soul in the settlement knew that a king's guard had walked 600 miles to honor a grave on the ridge, because old Mother Selwyn had seen us go up and the whole valley had been talking of nothing else for 5 days. So when we came down the last of the track into my fields, there were people waiting. Not many, there are not many of us, but all of them. The dozen families of Saltreach, standing in the cold at the edge of my land, having walked from their own farms to see the soldier who had come to the world's last fence for the forgotten dead. I have lived among these people 31 years. I have seen them at weddings and at burials and at the spring tax and the autumn shearing. I had never seen them stand the way they stood that evening, in a kind of awed silence, as a dust-grimed sergeant of the King's Guard came down off the ridge with my pack on my shoulders and the rebuilt cairn behind him. Old David Marn, the eldest among us, a man who had buried 2 sons the border took and never once been thanked for them, stepped forward. His voice shook. "Is it true?" he said. "Is it true there's men of the realm buried up there? Soldiers?" 120, Crane said. "A whole company. They held the line above your valley 60 years ago, in the worst winter anyone could remember, so the enemy couldn't come down through the gorge. They were never relieved. They were never honored. They were never brought home." He paused, and he looked around at the dozen weathered faces in the cold. "But they're not forgotten anymore. I read every one of their names over their grave today, and I'll see the realm reads them too." And old David Marn, 80 years old, hard as the country that bred him, A man I had never once seen weep, put his face in his hands and wept, there in my field in front of everyone. Because he understood the way only a forgotten man can understand, what it meant. It was not only the 120 up on the ridge who had just been honored. It was every man and woman of the far country who had ever given a sun, or a winter, or a whole hard life to the edge of the map, and been answered by the realm's silence. When Crane read those names on the ridge, he had spoken for all of them. He had said, with his soaked red coat and his held salute, the one thing the comfortable middle of the kingdom had never bothered to say to its far edge in living memory: you mattered. You were never nothing. Someone came. Crane stayed 3 more days in Saltreach, resting his road-worn body in my house, and in those 3 days something began that I could not have imagined when I first saw his shadow fall across my chopping block. He did not preach to us, or stir us up, or make speeches. He did a quieter thing. He sat at my table each evening with whoever crowded in to listen, and they all crowded in, and he told us the story of the far line, the whole of it, the holding and the winter and the old man who carried the roll down at 18 and spent 60 years trying to make the realm remember. He told it plainly, the way he did everything, and when he had told it, the people of Saltreach understood something they had never quite let themselves understand before, that the grave on the ridge was theirs. That the men under those stones had died for this valley, their valley, the last farmed land before the high ground, and that the care of that grave belonged by right to the folk who lived in its shadow. By the time Sergeant Crane shouldered his pack to begin the long walk back to the capital, the dozen families of Saltreach had made a vow among themselves. Not loudly, the way the lowlands make vows, but in the hard, quiet way of the far country, which means it is kept. They would tend the cairn. Every year on the autumn day the leaves turned, the same day the old man had crossed the road at the capital gates. They would climb the world's last fence, all of them who could walk it, and they would rebuild what the frost had heaved down, and they would read the names. Old Davitt Marn copied the company roll out in his careful hand from Crane's 60-year-old original, so that the names would never again rest in one fragile tin, and the children of Saltreach learned them and learned why. But Crane was not done. He had said he would see the realm read those names too, and a king's guard does not say a thing he does not mean. The walk back to the capital is its own long story, and I was not there for it, so I will tell only what I came to know. He went, when he reached the gates, not back to his post first but to the offices, the same offices that had turned the old man away for 60 years, the lost records and the closed matters and the no budget and the it was all very long ago. And this time, the matter was not raised by a bent old man, with no name the clerks would remember. It was raised by a sergeant of the King's Guard with 26 years at the gates, in full uniform, with the company roll in his hand and the whole story of the far line written out. And he stood at those counters with the same immovable patience he had stood the gates with, and he did not leave, and he did not stop, and he came back the next day and the day after, until the matter could not be lost again. It took a year. These things take a year, but word of it spread first among the guard, who are a brotherhood and do not forget their own, and then beyond the story of the 120 men of the far line, and the old man who carried them 60 years, and the sergeant who walked 600 miles to the edge of the map to stand at their grave because no one else would. It is the kind of story the realm, when it finally hears it, cannot bear to have ignored. The comfortable middle of the kingdom told at last what its far edge had given, did what people do when they are shown a debt they did not know they owed. It was ashamed, and then it was moved, and then it acted. The realm came to the world's last fence. Not all of it, of course, but the next autumn, on the day the leaves turned, when the dozen families of Saltreach climbed the ridge to tend the cairn and read the names, they were not alone. A party had come up from the capital, quietly, with no fanfare, the way Crane would have wanted it. There was an officer of the guard, and a stonemason and men to carry his tools, and Sergeant Crane himself, in his red coat, walking the last miles on foot beside us as he had the first time. And over the following days, on the bare crown of the world, the stonemason cut a proper memorial, not grand, not a thing of marble and gold that would have shamed the plain, hard men beneath it, but a clean block of the mountain's own gray granite, set at the head of the cairn where the worn slab had been, and on it, deep cut so that no 60 years of weather would ever wear them away again, the names, all 120. And beneath them, the words the old man had spent his life trying to win for his friends, which Crane had chosen, and which I think are the truest words I have ever read on any stone. They held the line no one came to relieve. The realm came late. It will not forget again. I am an old man myself now, and Sergeant Crane is older, and he has stood his last post at the Capitol gates and retired to a small house near them. But he still comes, every autumn on the day the leaves turn. He comes the 600 miles to Saltreach, and we climb the world's last fence together, slower each year, and we read the names. We are never alone on the ridge now. The realm sends someone always. The far line is on the maps again. The children of the capital learn the story in their schools. And the people of Saltreach, the dozen families who hung on for 30 years feeling like the forgotten edge of a kingdom that had no use for them, walk a little straighter than they used to, because they know now that the grave at the edge of the map is not a heap of rubble the realm walked past. It is the most honored ground in the whole far country, tended by the folk it died to keep, visited each year by the realm it kept, and watched over in stone by the names of 120 men who held the line. People ask me sometimes, lowlanders who have heard the story, what it was that changed everything. They want it to have been a grand thing, a decree, a monument, a great speech in the Capitol. It was none of those. It was one man, in a dusty red coat, who walked to the edge of the map because someone had to, and stood at full ceremonial honor in the freezing rain before a grave no one would ever see him honor, and read 120 names into the wind as though the whole realm were watching, when the only ones watching were one weeping settler, and the wind, and the dead. I have thought about that for the rest of my life. He did it the same whether anyone saw or not. That is the whole of it. That is what those 120 men did in the worst winter in living memory, holding a line no one came to relieve. They did their duty when no one would ever know. And that is what Aldous Crane did to honor them. And that is the thing I had been waiting my whole forgotten life to be shown, up there at the edge of the realm. That honor is not the realm remembering you. Honor is doing what is owed with your whole body, whether the realm remembers or not, and trusting that in the end, the remembering will come. The remembering came. It came late, the way it always does, but it came. And it came because one disciplined man decided not to wait for it and walked to the grave at the edge of the map and gave the forgotten far dead at last what they were owed. I keep his words on the lintel of my door now, cut into the wood, where I can read them every time I go out to my fields at the edge of the realm. Honor is a thing you do because it's owed. I have tried all the rest of my days to be worthy of having carried his pack.